Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mamie Yang. I'm the library director here at the Henry Waldinger Library in Valley Stream, New York. Today at our book club meeting, we are going to be discussing Beyond That, the Sea by Laura Spence-Ash. And we're very fortunate that the author is here to join us. This is a book that came across my desk and it seemed so intriguing, and I sent out an email to her and she responded immediately. So I said, yes, we're going to have her speak. And since then, her book has been chosen by Good Morning America as their book buzz of the month, one of their book buzz books, and then Today's Show. So she's really become quite the celebrity. So Laura is going to say a few words, and then please feel free to ask her questions when there's, you have something that you'd like to add. Okay.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about kind of the origin of the book, how I got the idea for the novel, and kind of how it ended up in the format that it is now. So in 1998, which was amazingly 25 years ago, I read an article in the New York Times about a group of older British adults who came to the States to see where they'd been during the war. And I had no idea that children were sent so far away and often alone. And my own children were young at the time. They were 1 and 5, and I couldn't imagine sending them away like that, having to make that impossible choice. So I wasn't really writing at the time, but I just couldn't stop thinking about this. And I read everything I could find on it. And I learned that something like 15,000 children were sent to the States and to Canada during the war. And I went to at one point I was in London, and I went to the Imperial War Museum, and that was really fascinating to kind of learn about domestic life during the Blitz. But then I read a memoir by a man who had been sent to the States with his brother, and they ended up in a town with a family in a town south of Boston. And it turned out completely coincidentally that was the town where I went to high school. And in fact, he and I went to the same school because it was a K through 12 school. And I was there as a boarding school student. He was there as a day student living with his family. And that for me was all of a sudden, I had a setting of a novel. Like by that point, I'd started to think about, could I write something about this? Could I somehow create this? And once I had that, I knew where the novel was going to take place, because that was a place where I also had been away from my family for the first time. Obviously, my experience was very different from his, but still, I knew what it was like to be in that place and to be so far from everyone that I knew. And I also knew how quickly that became a second home for me. And so out of the setting really blossomed all the characters, and everything else was fiction, right? Just grew out of that. But it was so essential that I sort of found that place. And I worked on that, trying to write the book for a long time. That was probably 2008, 2009 when I read that memoir. And I tried writing this book many, many times, and I kept getting a certain, maybe up to about page 100, and then I would just put it away. I tried different narrators. At first, I thought just Beatrix would tell the story. And then I thought perhaps Beatrix and the 2 boys that she lives with, William and Gerald, would tell the story. None of that seemed to work. And then I was getting increasingly interested also in the points of view of the parents. And so I thought, well, I really would like to show the points of view of everyone in both families. So that's 8 different points of view. And kind of at the same moment, I had written a short story that tracked 2 people over 30 years. And because it was a short story, it was just kind of pinging back and forth between these 2 characters in paragraphs. And I thought, well, let me try something like that, because I knew I wanted to cover this big swath of time. So let me see if I can just write these really short chapters using all these points of view, moving forward in time, and see how that works. And that was the thing that stuck. That was the thing that all of a sudden it made sense to me. This was how I wanted to tell this story. And when I started writing in that fashion, I started around in September of one year, and by March, I had a full draft written in that format. And then, of course, it was edited and revised multiple times, but that was clear to me then that I was telling the story the way that I wanted to tell it. So that's a little bit about kind of how the book came to be, both in terms of the idea for the story and then the format of the book itself.
I love the format because you could just read just enough of it and then go on and do something else. And
Yeah.
you were always visiting all these people.
That's great. I'm glad it worked for you. I mean, I like that too. And I think it's sort of fitting maybe with today's world where we do things in smaller bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little curious to see. Now you have these characters weaving in and out. I'm about one person, like I can only go one direction. Did you have to have like maps to keep track of things?
Not really. I think that I had worked on, especially the 1940 to 45, I had worked on that so many times that was pretty easy. I did start to get a little lost in time, just in terms of what year I was in, what month I was in. And so a couple things for that. The first thing is that I would write one of those short chapters and I would not let myself stop writing for the day until I started the next chapter. I decided whose point of view I was going to be in, what month and year it was going to be, and at least get a couple sentences down so that the next day when I sat down, I wasn't sort of facing that blank page, but I already had a direction. So that was really helpful. The other thing was that I started that timeline. For those of you that read a hard copy and not a Kindle version, that timeline at the bottom of the page, I actually put in there for my own for my own ease in writing so that I could remember where I was in time. And my readers, my first readers that I was workshopping this with, were just all loved that. Like they loved the idea of always knowing where they were in time. And I think it also underscores the fact that this is a novel. In some respects, it's a novel about time, right? It's about what happens over time. And so I really like that. And I was worried actually when the publisher was looking at it, when the editor was looking at it, that she was going to take that away. But she didn't, because she really liked it too. And I've heard from lots of readers that they've really enjoyed that it's something maybe you might see in a nonfiction book, but to see it in a novel is kind of a novel thing. And so, yeah, I've been really happy about that.
What surprised me is that at that time period, the United States wasn't allowing Jewish children to come in per se. And I said, and here these other people were allowed to come in. And I looked a lot of it on the internet and I said, well, it happened and this is the United States and the way our government works. But it was kind of upsetting.
Yeah, I can understand that for sure. Yeah, it seems totally wrong. And actually, they did stop the program pretty soon after fictional Beatrix got here, because I mean, I put her on a specific ship, and then the next ship, or maybe not the next one, but the one after that, was torpedoed. And a number of children died. And so no children were allowed to come after that point. So in actuality, she would have been one of the last children to come. Yeah, but I agree with you. It's not, and yes, that is telling of the US government, right?
I have a question. Now, was it a lot to do with that she was like basically upper middle class, basically? What do you think?
I think she was closer to middle class. And it was just a connection. I mean, this isn't in the book, but just in my mind, there was a connection that her father had at work to somebody who might have had a little bit more money and figure it. So she was actually, again, in my mind, this was a private placement. There were a number of private placements, groups that got together in Boston. There was like a group of people that kind of gathered together and said, yes, we would like to host children. And so they made themselves available. And so there were private programs, there were also public programs. But for her, I thought it was a private program, and it was just through this connection that Reg had at work. but I think she was lucky, right? I think if he hadn't had that connection, she would not have been able, this would not have happened for her.
What amazes me is that in that time period, all these people got together and took in all these strangers. And now we have this immigration problem, and they're busing people and families and children all over the place. And yet the Hispanic population hasn't been able to get together and take in these people. And the government, with everything that it's trying to do, is just so disorganized. I mean, if the government put together a program that said, look, if you take this person into your house, we'll provide the medical care in case they need it. We'll let you go to the food bank if you can need more food for them. And a country as big as ours is so disorganized, and they're wreaking havoc by taking these strangers and putting them into college dorms. And I mean, where's logic?
I know, I agree with you.
Well, they, you know, like you, what was it? If you don't know history, you may repeat yourself. What was that little phrase? Well,
Right.
we haven't learned anything from this, right?
Right, right.
I think it's worse now, and we're going back, and the resentment, it's just really kind of criminal. But well, I have you heard from people who experienced this, have read the book and said, well, that echoes what happened to me or my family?
A few people, not a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of even the children then would no longer be with us, right? So, and it hasn't been sold in the UK, so it is available like on Kindle in the UK, but not the hard copies are not in bookstores. And so I think that also, like that I would love to talk to some British people about this, but no. I mean, I've heard sort of, friends of friends who this had happened to, but not, and no one I haven't talked to anyone in America who was part of a host family or anything like that. But again, now we're going, when you go back to 1940, that's going back a long time. So, yeah.
I loved how you did the love story, but I was kind of disappointed in William's life trajectory. I mean, he was so promising in the beginning, and he just sort of didn't make it through life very well.
I know. He made me sad all the time, right? Someone who had such potential and then just never felt at home in his own skin, right? He was a hard character to write because of that, I found. I mean, I really struggled with, I almost wanted to judge him, right? And I didn't want to judge him. So it was sort of hard sometimes to kind of try to understand him and to be sympathetic to what he was going through. Yeah, but that was hard. That was definitely hard to write him at times. But I also know, don't you? I know many people like that, right? People who have had this enormous potential early on, and then somehow it just doesn't, they just never quite live up to that for a variety of reasons.
I think he was doing his best by Rose because she had gotten pregnant, and he felt trapped. And he said, let me just do the simple thing, work in this bank, no future. He enjoyed his kids. I'm glad you put that in.
Right.
But it was sad.
Yeah.
And Millie, I compared Millie in all her discussions with Beatrice to me and my daughter, who hasn't gotten married yet. And I say, what's happening here? And Millie was just, once her husband died, she became a free person. She went from one guy to the next.
Yeah, I liked Millie. People have asked me about Millie and Nancy being sort of, these very opposite kinds of mothers, right? And I think that's how it started for me. But as as I wrote it, as I edited, as I revised it, I think I became kinder and kinder to Millie. Like I understood Millie more and more. And so I think they became less polar opposites for me. And they became more similar. And I was really, really happy when they sort of reconnected towards the end and, could see themselves in each other, right? And could sort of understand. But at the same time, I very much could understand Millie's envy and her jealousy. And because I think that I would feel that way too, right? If my child was with another family and if that family was able to give her things that I perhaps was unable to give
Well,
them.
for Beatrice, I felt that she really thought Nancy was her mother more than Millie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think so, right?
She was much closer to her because during those teenage years is when she had Nancy.
Right. Right. And I do think those teenage years are so formative, right? I mean, those are really years when you become yourself, right, on some level. And so, yeah.
Did you feel that you needed all 6 characters to balance out the story? Like what would happen to your story if you took one of them? You didn't have all 6 characters.
So I think Rose is the one maybe you could take out, right? Because she wasn't part of the original family. And I wasn't sure that it was going to work actually, because kind of one of the unwritten rules is that you're not supposed to introduce characters like too late in a novel, right? But at the same time, I really enjoyed writing Rose. I thought it gave kind of the book a little bit of energy towards the end, this brand new character that we hadn't met before. I really liked her arc, being sort of a young woman in the 60s, sort of representing that group of women that as they were growing up thought that they were just going to be sort of just a wife and a mother, but then were able to also sort of enter the working world. And so I really enjoyed that. And I wouldn't have wanted to eliminate any of the other characters, right? I really wanted to show everyone in both families. I mean, certainly somebody like Reg is just not around as much, right? He dies early. He's just not as prominent a character. But I like the idea of representing everyone in both families because for me, this really is a novel. I mean, Beatrix is at the center, but it's really a novel about family and about these 2 families specifically. So I think it was important to let everyone kind of have their say and tell their story.
And you made the connection that everybody eventually played chess.
Yeah, and that started just as a little, thing. I know a little bit about postal chess because my son played when he was young. Well, he played competitive chess when he was younger, and then while he was doing that, he was playing postal chess with my husband's uncle, and that just worked so well between Peter and Reg. I love that. I mean, sorry, between Ethan and Reg, and I love that. Just how that worked and the idea, just like with the letters in the book, the idea of how different things like that are today, like how we don't wait for things in that way anymore, right? I mean, there are people still playing postal chess, but
play chess online.
Yeah, but most people don't play chess online. Right? And so
it's a different world.
Yeah, it worked so well that I thought, okay, let me keep this going then as a kind of a thread throughout the book and to keep it, always uniting the different generations. And yeah, I think it worked really well.
Have you sold a lot of books?
I don't really know. I don't get information. I think it's doing pretty well. They seem pretty happy. So I hope so. Yeah, I think it's doing well. It seems to be doing really well on Kindle. So that's great.
I had a thought and now I lost it. Oh God. Trying to think. I'll remember it in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
So, no, we've had the opportunity in this book group to meet a lot of authors. So, you know, like, what were you trying to do with the book? Is just to accomplish something, so you say, I wrote one book, or you know, that's one book is enough, or do you expect to do more books?
I would definitely like to do more books. Absolutely. I hopefully the next one will not take me years and years and years like this one did. And I don't think it will. But yeah, this was so in terms of sort of my background, I wrote in college, and always thought I would get back to it, but then, you know, life, right? So I ended up instead getting an MBA and working in finance and then in marketing for many years. And then I worked at Princeton for a long time in administrative roles. And then my parents died. My father died in 2007. My mother died in 2012. And in both of those, they were sort of wake-up calls, right? Like I think they are for many of us when our parents die. Like, what am I going to now do with the rest of my life? And writing was the thing for me. So the summer after my father died, I went to my first kind of summer writing conference. And I got to study with Ann Packer, who's a writer that I just love. And I came back from that all ready, like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get back to this now. And then, you know, life got in the way again. And then after my mother died, same thing. I went to another summer writing conference. This one was in New York, and it was with a literary journal called One Story. And so the way workshops, that kind of a week-long program works is every day you workshop like two people's stories, right? So the whole group talks about the story and gives you feedback. So I was up on the Thursday of that week. I was the second person to be workshopped. So we workshopped the first person. And then the man who was an editor at One Story asked to see me before we talked about my story. So I was just panicked, right? I thought, oh my God, either I've said something horrible that he wants to reprimand me, or my story is so bad that he's going to tell me, you know, this is going to be a really rough conversation. You need to be ready. Instead, he said to me that he loved the story that I was workshopping and that he thought they should publish it in One Story. And One Story is one of the top literary journals in the country. I was just, I like couldn't speak. My heart was like beating. And it was just wonderful. And that's a moment, a literal moment that sort of changed my life. They ended up publishing that. It gave me the courage to apply to MFA programs, which was something I'd always wanted to do, but just never had the courage to do. So I was, and they, at the MFA program that I went to, which was Rutgers Newark, they gave me a teaching fellowship. So that allowed me to quit my job at Princeton and do that full time, which was amazing. And then since then, I've just been editing and writing freelance and writing, and it's just been amazing. So that's kind of my trajectory with writing. And now I can call myself a writer. And yeah, so I'm working on, I have a couple other projects that I'm working on. So I hope one of them will get to the end and become a book. But hopefully that won't be the last one either. That's my plan.
Now I remember what I was getting. So this was your debut novel. So did you have to send this out to everyone, or, you know, your connections from your MFA program, someone solicited to you?
Yeah, no solicitation. So you have to get an agent first if you want it to be published, you know, not self-published or not published in a really teeny press. And so I started querying agents in February of 20, which in hindsight, maybe not, don't do that before a global pandemic hits. So you send out these query letters, right? And the problem with this whole process is that if it's a no, you often never hear from them. They just never get back to you. So you don't know, are they still reading what I've sent? Are they still thinking about it? Or is it just a no? And that first round of queries that I sent out, I got no response at all. And I was just devastated because a lot of them I had some kind of contact with. Either I knew someone who was one of their clients, or I'd met them, or what have you. So I just kind of ran away from the project, honestly. I mean, it was also the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone was kind of running away from everything. But it wasn't until the following October, so October of 20, that I sent out another round of queries. I had better response that time, but nothing panned out. And then in February of 21, I sent out another round, and a friend of mine told me to add an agent to the list that I sent to then. So I did that. And that agent asked, within a couple of days, asked for 50 pages. And then a month later, they asked for the whole manuscript. And then I didn't hear anything from them. And then the beginning of May, so this is now the beginning of May 21, I heard from another agent at that agency telling me the original agent had sent the manuscript onto her and she wanted to know if it was still available. I said yes. She read it and she passed. So I thought, okay, now I'm done with this round. Now I've got to figure, do I do another round of queries? Do I just trash this? Do I try and edit this? Like, I really was in that place. And then on a Monday night, like the third week of May of that year, I got an email from that original agent, and she said she had found the manuscript in her iPad, because their assistants just load their iPads with all these manuscripts. And she'd started reading and she couldn't stop. And she wasn't done yet, but she wanted to know if it was still available. I said yes. And 2 days later, she got back to me and said that she wanted to represent me. So there was a lot of luck in that, right? Because I don't think she was looking for it. I think she literally found it in her iPad. And then things happened really, really fast. So I had always heard you would spend about a year with an agent doing another big edit of the manuscript, but that didn't happen. We had a phone conversation. She mentioned a few things. I had a few things I wanted to do. I wrote a new prologue. The prologue that you read I wrote then. I changed another, small things here and there, nothing major. And then the beginning of July, she sent it out to, I think, 9 editors, and she sent it out on a Friday, and on Wednesday we had an offer from one of them, and it was what's so-called a preempt offer, meaning that they sort of offer enough money that should sort of take it off the table, and we ended up accepting that offer. And so by the middle of July, the book was sold, which was just kind of crazy. I never expected that. I absolutely, given my experience with the agents, I thought we're going to go to this round and then we're going to go to another round and maybe we'll go to a third round. So that was just mind blowing. Honestly, it was wonderful.
So I lost track of the year. So that was July of
2021. Yeah.
And the book came out in
March
of 23. That's still pretty quick.
It's pretty, I think they usually say about 18 months ish from when they sell it to when it's out, maybe a little bit longer for a debut because they want to build in extra time in case there's more editing time needed or what have you. Yeah, interestingly, so that was July. I didn't actually get the edits from my editor until November. And then they were due back in January of 22. And then we went through, there was one and she didn't really have big things, but we went through a couple of rounds of smaller things and then the copy edits. But by April of last year, it was done. So it's been done. It was done for almost a year before it came out. Yeah.
It's a lot of times I think they have to plan their calendar of what's going to be published and make sure, to have a balance of what they want to offer to the public. So
right.
Yeah.
And keeping an eye on the competition too, right? Thinking about what else is coming out from other presses, etc.
Now I have a question for you, which is kind of like something it has something to do with you. Now so when you sent out like starter chapters and you said 50 pages and now it was all on an iPad, do you ever get concerned that it's going to get plagiarized?
I really don't. And that's true when I was submitting and when I do submit short stories. Like I remember early on, I was always submitting things in PDF because I thought, well, that's safer. Somebody can't just like copy and paste. But I think now, having been in this business for a while, I don't really worry about that. I know it happens every once in a while I know there was an incident at one of the literary journals where somebody, a reader for that journal actually then, turned a story down and then later published a story that was very similar to that story that she turned down. So I know it happens, but I don't really worry about it. And honestly, when I'm a reader for another journal, and when I see people, sometimes we see submissions where they're copyrighted and they've done sort of things to try and protect it, and that's sort of not done. So when I see that, I kind of am wary about that. So it's almost the other way around, honestly.
Well, two things, like that whole thing with Ed Sheeran, the musician, like he was being sued because maybe he ever heard, one time he heard the song or something and something clicked. So I would worry about that. But just about 2 months ago, a nonfiction book, we got notified by the publisher to pull them all off. We had just gotten the book. He had plagiarized over 72 passages from the book. And he didn't even bother, it was a nonfiction book, he didn't even bother changing the words. So it's like I wonder, we got a notification from our book vendor to pull all copies from the book, and you'll get a credit for it. And it had only gone out once. It had been published on that Tuesday. By Thursday or Friday, whoever he plagiarized notified the publisher that he picked everything out. And by the following week, we were all notified, all the libraries who own the book were notified to pull the copies, return them. I mean, just destroy them.
Right. That's terrible.
So that's like, I wanted to know, like, you said that you're sending these out to all these people.
Right. I mean, when you're querying the agents, you're not actually often sending out very much. You're sending, usually the most they want is about 10 pages at the very beginning. And a lot of them just want a letter. They just want a synopsis. They want to know who you are, and that's it. So there's not much to be worried about, I guess. Yeah.
It's just like that. I haven't heard about that, and that was such a shocker because he was also that's like, I can't really remember his name. This was a nonfiction book. He was considered an expert in his field.
It's terrible.
Yes.
How could he think he wouldn't get caught? Like, I just don't understand that.
And no one caught it until after it was published, because it was a specific topic. So all the people who are into that specific topic probably got the book on Tuesday or Wednesday, and they would be the only ones to know that he plagiarized.
Right.
Maybe his editor would just be fact checking, but they wouldn't be necessarily looking for plagiarism. Which, in your case, did you have to do a lot of fact checking? To make, like you said, the ship and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I did a fair bit. I had sort of hoped that the copy editor would do a little more than actually she did. She was really more thinking about grammar, I think, than she was doing any fact checking. And after it had happened to me, then I talked to some of my friends who'd already been published, and they were like, oh yeah, that used to happen, right? There used to be, the copy editor would do a lot of fact checking, but not so much. In fact, my book has been sold the book's been sold into a number of foreign territories, and Germany is one. And the German, the translator did way more fact checking than the American copy editor. I mean, she had some really, really good, questions and points, and it was quite great. And she'd actually spent some time in London, so she had a few things there too. So that was wonderful. But yeah, now I know moving forward, I would definitely either, I think, hire an outside fact checker or ask the publisher to make sure to get somebody who will do more fact checking as well as copy editing.
I think in a lot of books, especially if you do it in a place where people are familiar, like if you say it's only 10 blocks away, the people who know it, they know it's really 15 blocks away, or if you're in Manhattan, you can't be saying you're going, east or west when it's a street they call North South. So
Right.
that kind of fact checking really can put somebody off if they see that,
How much work did Macmillan do on this book, if any? Macmillan owns the
Macmillan owns Celadon, that's right. So the only real contact I've had with Macmillan has been the sales. So that their sales, I believe, are all consolidated. So it's Macmillan salespeople who are out in the field selling the book to bookstores. And so I had the chance to meet some of those Macmillan sales reps. So that was one. And the other thing is the audio book. That's all done through Macmillan Audio. So all the work that I did with them in terms of choosing the narrator, et cetera, was done through Macmillan. But everyone else that I worked with was at Celadon proper. My editor is actually the publisher of Celadon. And so I worked obviously very closely with her, and then with the PR people and the marketing people, et cetera. But yeah, so that's kind of how it works, I think, is that they have a few things that they do for all the imprints.
Macmillan advance the money to Celadon, or is it Celadon's own money from a division of that they have in Macmillan? Because there has to be some sort of funds to finance a publisher, a publication of this.
I don't know how the money works. I don't know if they're given, at the top of each year, they have a budget, and then my editor, the publisher, is allowed to spend it however she wants, or whether she has to go to Macmillan, especially for an advance, if she has to go to Macmillan to actually request that money. I just don't know how that works. I know I have a friend of mine she's not at Macmillan. She's, I think, at Penguin Random House. And when they were bidding on her book, a number of imprints within Penguin Random House were bidding, and Penguin Random House actually, they had one level of bids, and then they were going to like the next level. And at that point, somebody at the top of Penguin Random House said, okay, it's gonna be this imprint. And so we're gonna take all that money that's coming from the different imprints, and we're gonna put it all together so we can have this huge bid from this one imprint. And that was fascinating to me, actually, because I didn't know it worked like that. I thought each imprint just had their own money and you had what you had, but that was clearly somebody at the top of Penguin Random House saying, we want this book and this is how we're going to get it. So, but I don't know if Macmillan works like that or not.
That's your agent's job, not yours?
Yeah.
To know where to get the money from?
Yes, that's my agent's job.
And maybe your next book, there'll be a bidding war.
Yes.
So you said you're doing a lot of writing, though. So are you working on another novel?
I am. I had, so when I was in my MFA, I wrote a lot of short stories. I really didn't work on this at all. And I had put together a collection of short stories, which I ended up feeling like it wasn't really strong enough as a collection of short stories. But there were a couple of stories and a couple of characters that I really liked. And so, and they weren't joined when they were in the collection, but now they are. I've kind of put them together, these 3 different characters. So that's what I'm working on. It's been a little hard to find the time lately, but I'm hopeful this summer maybe things will calm down a little bit and I can do that. Yeah.
Did you live in Massachusetts or Maine? Or how did you get was your father a professor at some school, that he had free lodging? Where did he get all these ideas? Because they're rather difficult for the average person to see and integrate in their lives.
Right.
In other words, your life had to be something unique for you to put this book together.
So mostly it was fictional. I mean, I went to high school at the same school where this man whose memoir I read, he went to school. So that was in south of Boston, a town south of Boston where I lived for 3 years. And so I imagined that this family lived in that town, but my father actually was a professor, but he was a professor at NYU, so it was a very different situation. And I've been to Maine a number of times, but I've never lived in Maine, certainly never lived on an island in Maine. But my family, because my father was a professor, he had the summer off. And we actually used to go to Martha's Vineyard every summer when I was young. So not the same thing at all, but the idea, I think, of picking up your family and going, we went for a month, for the month of August, picking up your family and going somewhere for an extended period of time was something I was somewhat familiar with. And my sister actually for a long time lived in Lake Placid out on a lake, and the only way to get there was by boat. So you could walk out, but you couldn't drive to their house. So if you needed milk or butter or whatever, you had to actually get in the boat and go. So I had that experience as well as something to draw on, but mostly it was just all fiction. I mean, that's what I love to do, is to sort of start with a kernel of something and then just make it all up. That's what's fun to me.
So how many years was this kernel in your head before you sat down with a pen?
So I read this article in the Times in 1998, and I don't think I really started writing for about 10 years, till about 2008. I think around 2008, I started writing something. And then it took from 2008 until a couple of years ago to actually get it in the format that I wanted it in.
How come you hated Harvard?
How come I don't hate Harvard?
Well, you didn't think much of their students.
I don't
And you
hate
didn't think it
Harvard.
was that difficult to get in.
I think that's what happens when you work at Princeton for a long time, right? My father went to Harvard, so yeah.
Oh, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for Laura? Okay. If not, we really appreciate your visit. It's always great to know the insights of what we're reading. And it's just adds more to your experience as a reader.
Right, right.
I don't know. Now we've been doing this for the last year or so now. It's been really valuable, I think, for everybody to get the insights. And I'm so happy that you were able to take the time to meet with us.
Oh, yes. Well, it was my pleasure. It was lovely to talk to you all. Thank you.
And we'll be keeping out for an eye out for your next book then.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll be doing Zooms then, but we'll be in touch then.
Okay. And also look the New York Times this Sunday, the summer reading issue. It's the book's mentioned in there. So that's very exciting. Yeah.
Always good to know. Okay. Thank you, Laura.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.